Ever wondered why a candy bar that cost a dime when your grandparents were kids now costs over $1? It's a common observation, isn't it? The same goods requiring more money to purchase as time goes on. Think about it, is it just candy bars? Or are there other things that have become more expensive over the years? Items that were once considered luxuries, now everyday essentials, also seem to have climbed the price ladder. This phenomenon, my friends, is called inflation. Inflation, a term you often hear in the news, but what does it really mean? Let's take a moment to unpack this economic concept. Picture this. You're at a market with a pocket full of money, ready to buy all the goods you need. But as you start picking items off the shelves, you realize that the same amount of money is not getting you as much as it once did. That's inflation at work. Inflation is essentially the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services is rising. It's a bit like the tide coming in at the beach. As the water rises, you have to move your towel further and further back to avoid getting wet. In the same way, as inflation rises, the purchasing power of your money is falling. You're getting less bang for your buck, so to speak. Now, why does this happen? One of the main reasons is an increase in production costs. When it becomes more expensive to make goods or provide services, businesses often pass these costs on to consumers. And when all businesses do this, the result is a general rise in prices. That's inflation. Another reason could be increased demand for goods and services. When more people want to buy something than there is available, prices tend to go up. It's the old law of supply and demand. Finally, inflation can also be a result of government policies. For example, if a government prints more money than is needed, it can lead to too much money chasing too few goods, which can cause prices to rise. But remember, inflation isn't always a bad thing. In fact, a moderate amount of inflation is often seen as a sign of a healthy economy. It can stimulate spending and investment, which can lead to economic growth. However, high inflation can be troublesome, as it can erode purchasing power and create uncertainty. In simpler terms, as inflation rises, every dollar you own buys a smaller percentage of a good or service. So, just like you would move your towel back when the tide comes in at the beach, you need to plan and adjust your spending when inflation rises. So, we now know what inflation is, but how does it affect us, the society? Well, the effects of inflation are far-reaching and can impact us in various ways. One of the most immediate impacts of inflation is the erosion of purchasing power. This means that when inflation rises, each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services. Imagine having $100 today, and then suddenly, that $100 can only buy you half of what it could yesterday. That's the eroding power of inflation. Inflation also increases the cost of living. This can be felt in everyday expenses such as food, housing, and transportation. When prices increase, you might find that you need to tighten your belt a bit, cut back on some luxuries, or even struggle to meet basic needs. Moreover, inflation creates uncertainty in the economy. When inflation is high, it's harder for businesses to plan for the future, and this can lead to less investment and slower economic growth. It's like trying to navigate through a thick fog. You're unsure of what's ahead, and that's not a comfortable position to be in. However, it's important to note that moderate inflation is not necessarily a bad thing. It could indicate a growing economy. But when inflation spirals out of control, that's when it becomes a problem. In essence, unchecked inflation can make life more expensive and economically unpredictable. Before we wrap up, let's summarize what we've learned today. Inflation, in its simplest form, is the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services is rising. It's a natural part of our economy, but if left unchecked, it can have serious implications. We've discussed how inflation impacts society. It's like a double-edged sword. On one hand, moderate inflation can stimulate spending and investment, fueling economic growth. On the other, high inflation erodes purchasing power, making everyday items more expensive and potentially widening the wealth gap. And why does this matter to you? Because understanding inflation helps you to make smarter financial decisions. It influences everything from your savings to your investments, and even your day-to-day spending. So the next time you hear about inflation in the news, you'll know exactly what it means and how it could affect you. Remember, understanding inflation equips us to make more informed financial decisions. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.